It's really an honor for me to be here at the College of the Atlantic. I have been a big admirer of what you all are up to. And I feel like it's carrying on a tradition of engaged environmentalism that's been a big part of my life. It's something I want to touch on today. But it is great to be able to share with you all my favorite topic, which is Taoism, and the Taoist underpinnings of traditional Chinese medicine, a medicine that recognizes the interdependence of personal and planetary well-being, and views our personal health as dependent on our connection to the natural world, which I think will make sense to all of you, as dependent on our connection to some kind of sacredness, whatever that is for us, and as well our connection to our own authentic being, you know, the truth of who we are, which is what the Chinese refer to as Tao. So let's dive in with this philosophical concept, Tao, which is in a certain way the simplest and probably most complex concept in all of world philosophy. I want you to begin with a quote by my favorite teacher, Master Lao Tzu, whose name means both old one and child. So he's the old boy who's also the sage, in that sense that he's returned to his own roots. And Lao Tzu is considered to be one of the most important Taoist philosophers. He's a poet, and many of his ideas really do underpin Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. This is a quote from verse 1 of the Tao Te Ching. He begins this book by saying that the Tao, this thing that we're grappling with, the Tao that can be talked about, the Tao that can be spoken, is not the eternal Tao. The Tao that can be named, or the name that can be named, is not the eternal name. So Tao that we're talking about here is both named and nameless. As nameless, it is the origin of all things, and as named, it is the mother of all things. So we're beginning to get at this duality. When we talk about the visible face of Tao, which is the name of our talk, we're talking about how something that's invisible becomes visible. And then up here, I put my favorite part of verse 1, which is at the end. It says, Tao and this world. So that thing that can't be named, that's nameless, that's invisible, Tao and this world, they seem different. But in truth, they are one and the same. The only difference between this divine and this world is what we call them, how deep and mysterious this unity is. So that's Lao Tzu's first words on Tao. And what he's getting at is that the mystery, the sacred, the origin of everything we know that we can never quite reach is also right here. It's not far away. For the Chinese, the divine isn't some abstraction or some old guy sitting in a chair up in heaven or something that we can't talk about. The divine is here. It's really right here in our life. In fact, it's both. It's that which can't be named and that which can be named. It's the invisible, and it's also how that invisible has a visible face. So, the visible face. Now, I'm going to tell you, I just recently read a warning by a Zen monk, Ryokan, who warned students. He said one of his big warnings was, don't use too many Chinese concepts. That was in the 1700s. So I read that in a book of his warnings. He's a Zen Buddhist, and I thought, oh boy, that's an important message for me. So I'm trying to limit the Chinese concepts that I'm piling in here. They're going to be limited. And actually, there's mainly three. So the Tao is the first, and Li is the second concept that we're going to be bringing in. So Li is, how does this Tao make itself visible in our world? And the Chinese word is Li. Tao becomes visible through nature. It becomes visible through the textures, the patterns, the rhythms of the natural world. Li is that organic order which brings the absolute chaos of Tao into being. The word itself comes from, it's a two-part character. On the left is the character for jade, and as you see in the background, that's the patterns of jade, the Li that's in stone, the Li that we can see when we look at organic material, growing things. So on the left is that character for jade, and on the right is a beautiful radical, it's a piece of a Chinese character, which is also the phonetic, it's Li. And that word means the lining. It's a combination character including a field and the inside. So what Li is like the lining or inside of something. And it also refers to our home. And it also refers to the earth. So as Tao becomes manifest, we see it in the patterns and rhythms of the natural world. The Taoists particularly loved water, and the metaphor for Tao is water because they saw in the patterns and rhythms of water the multidimensional ordering of the invisible sacred. Same for wood. Li, this is the grain or texture of the wood. And here's a picture by Alex Gray which shows Li as manifest in us. And this is where we begin to touch on Chinese medicine because the acupuncture meridians, which are invisible in a certain sense, yet present in the body as, you could say, energy or flow of life force, are actually following the Li of our being, the grain or texture, as Tao manifests in us. So I want to just invite you for a moment to just take a quick look. Again, Tao is not only up there and far away, something divine, something invisible, but it's right here in your own hands. So if you just take a breath and take a look at your own hands, at the grain, the texture, the lines. And at first it may seem like, oh yeah, these are just my hands. I see them all the time. But then if you let your awareness drop, and I'm going to bring in another Chinese term called Xuan. We can talk more about Xuan, but Xuan is the place in us where our thoughts stop. So if you just for a minute find that place in yourself, and it's a mystery where it is. In the text, they say, oh, no one really knows where Xuan is. Where's that place in us where our thoughts stop? But just sometimes you can find it by just taking a breath and letting your awareness drop down a bit. Some of you may already have practices where you do this meditation or Qigong. And then look again at your hands. And seeing those lines of your own story as they imprint themselves through time into form. So we're no different than the jade or the water or the wood, the grains of the wood. We're organic beings, form and time and the sacred imprints itself. So when I look at my hands, I see, the scars from years of gardening and burns from 20 years of burning mugwort and picking it up with my fingers off of people's bodies and, you know, my own years of working many years ago as an environmental activist, and how my feelings and my longings to change the world showed in my hands, moving from there into picking up a needle and finding another way to bring change. So just take 1 minute before we move on and just see, well, what is it? What's the story that's imprinted itself? What's the Li in your own hands? The story, the way the Tao, your way, imprints itself. So, moving from that little bit of what we call inner work in Chinese medicine, kind of going in and letting something come from the inside, I want to jump to a little historical background. When we talk about Chinese medicine, which is what I do, of course, as John said, I'm a practitioner of Chinese medicine and acupuncturist for a long time. But there's a lot of, there's acupuncture, and then there's thousands of acupuncture. You know, there's so many styles and so many ways of practicing out there. So when we say traditional Chinese medicine, it can mean many things. The thing I want to clarify here is that currently in the world now, what's often being considered traditional Chinese medicine, it's called TCM. TCM. And TCM is a very, it's only a small part of the tradition of Chinese medicine, which of course, as most of you know, is over 3,000 years old. Okay, so traditional Chinese medicine comprises a body of learning that goes back eons. TCM is a very modern, it's a predominantly materialistic form of medicine. In fact, in mainland China, after the communist takeover, all classical healing traditions were banned. And for many years, anyone who practiced classical Chinese medicine was imprisoned. People were tortured. Many people had to leave the country. Some of the great sages were even killed. And it was a pretty violent, aggressive tamping down of a huge part of China's cultural heritage. But then, after the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, Mao and many other government leaders began to realize, hey, wait a minute. You know, this is a very cheap, very effective way to deal with this huge population of people. You know, you can avoid pharmaceuticals, you can avoid, in some cases, other kinds of more expensive medicine. And they reinstated acupuncture in Chinese medicine in the late 60s. And they called it, it's often called barefoot doctor medicine. Okay, so that became, when acupuncture started coming to this country, it was coming over as a pretty practical, materialistic, work with physical symptoms kind of medicine. That's why people say, oh, acupuncture, bad backs, headaches, maybe you use it for a cold, you know, and it's like one tiny part of this vast tradition that became popularized and is now mostly what's practiced in China, and is a large part of what it's taught worldwide. It's not that okay, what can I say about TCM? I don't practice TCM, but I respect TCM for what it does. It really can be very helpful in a limited way, because for the communist Chinese, there is no such thing. The soul doesn't play a part in the communist regime. And pretty much the idea that a person could have a psychological or spiritual life is not discussed. Okay, so the medicine doesn't address those parts of being human. However, traditional Chinese medicine, this medicine that, as I said, is probably over 3,000 years, has been around for a very long time. And for myself, I call it alchemical acupuncture. That's the name of the work I do. I've kind of given it that name because it's a medicine not about restoration or restoring health, but about the transformation of a human being. What are we really up to here? And for the ancient Taoists, who were the first doctors, that was the real question of healing. I mean, of course, nobody wants to be in pain. You know, physical pain, if we can take that away, that's a wonderful thing. But that's not the essential piece of what it means to be human. So this is an ancient system of medicine based on Taoist philosophy. We can say 500 BCE is a good rough history. You know, we're talking dates. Nobody can say exactly 500 BCE, but that's basically when we say Taoism began. However, it's rooted in even much earlier shamanic traditions. And those traditions still pull through when you really practice this medicine deeply. It's multiple modalities, and again, it was on the handout, but there's acupuncture, Moxa, which is work with mugwort, artemisia for those of you who are botanists, Tuina, which is Chinese massage, herbal medicine, mineral tinctures, Qigong, Tai Chi even has a medical aspect, but Qigong is definitely a medical practice, meditation, and diet. This is the body of traditional Chinese medicine. And it is a medicine, it's a complete medicine. We work with the body, mental, emotional issues, and the spiritual level of being human. These are the tools of my trade. For those of you who've never seen acupuncture needles, thought they're always fun to look at. Everybody seen an acupuncture needle? Oh, good. I like to bring these. I figure, you know, let's get down. What do I actually do here? Besides talk about philosophy and meditate on the divine and all that, which I love. That's really, but still, these are pretty cool. And in fact, in some of the texts, they refer to the needle as a celestial lancet, right? I mean, can you imagine a medicine? You know, you go for surgery and the surgeon says, pass me my celestial lance. I mean, like, that's a medicine I can get behind, you know? So this is an acupuncture needle. And I now use needles that are pre-sterilized. They come in tubes. When I first started working, we used autoclaves. Unfortunately, for the environment, now we do create waste because these get taken away. They're used once, taken away. You recognize these red boxes. That looks like the hospital, you know. That makes it like it's a real medical office. But anyway, these. So here's a needle, right? So for those of you who were scared or thought this would hurt, the needle, this particular gauge needle is about the gauge, same size as 2 hairs from your head. And later at the end, you can come on up and look at them. And but with this needle, if I actually can penetrate into that place where the grain is, where the li is, a needle like this will change someone's state of being in that fast. So that's, of course, the beautiful, beautiful part of Chinese medicine is that it's so simple and it can be so profound. Now, for myself, I am trained to use herbs. These are Chinese prepared herbs, big part of Chinese medicine. I also use essential oils on points. You can move qi. What I say is anything that moves the qi, qi is the life force that flows through those meridians that you saw. Anything that moves the life force can be used in a tool in alchemical acupuncture. So I use the needles, I use oils, I use flower essences. Some of you may know what those are. You can ask me later if you don't. We use liniments. This is a Chinese liniment called, what's it called again? Benjamin Fox is my partner, and he uses some of this stuff too. Ooh-ee oil. Now say that. Ooh-ee oil. It's really fun. So that's a liniment. And again, these herbs that are packaged in Chinatown where I order herbs, they are all raw. And ginger, which you all know, is a really important Chinese herb. Okay, so that's the scope of it. But underlying all these different modalities is a single worldview, a single philosophy. So although TCM and these more traditional spirit, what we could call spirit level treatments or alchemical treatments, use the same tools. We use these tools differently. So in TCM, basically, if someone comes in with a bad back, a barefoot doctor or TCM practitioner has a kind of a cookbook. We call it Cookbook Acupuncture. And he goes, oh, bad back, okay, we'll put some needles in the lumbar, maybe shoot you up with some electrostim. You know, this is what people do now. Rub a little liniment on, boom, you're out of here. And a lot of these practitioners, they're doing good work and they're helping with pain. They may be even running a clinic, and a lot of barefoot doctors and TCM practitioners are doing really wonderful work in, again, delivering healthcare to many people. So it's powerful that way. But it's not, as I said, going into the transformation of this person's life. Like, what's going on that they have the bad back? So for me, as an alchemical practitioner, I'm going to say, okay, now, what is it in the grain or the texture of this person's days that's creating this pain? And what is the message of the body? What is the body trying to say? Because again, we're looking at body, mind, and spirit as interrelated, not separate. And if a patient comes in with a bad back, I may look to see, oh, well, is it along the bladder meridian in the back, which is related to the emotion of fear, and we're going to be looking at where is perhaps their anxiety in this person's life, where is their maybe fear of moving forward, how perhaps is this person living out of integrity with Tao, and in that using personal will to force their life, which is anathema, did I say that word right? To the Taoists, using personal will to force my life will always result in some kind of pain. We're going to want to support in our work a coming back to flow, coming back to integrity with self. And when I choose points, I don't just look in a book. I really look at the person's story. For example, a person with a bad back may feel unsteady in his or her life. And I could choose a point on the meridian where the pain is that has a name, a spirit name. For example, there's a point called Kunlun Mountain, which is on the lateral malleolus. It's the bottom of this bladder meridian that runs all the way into the back. And Kunlun Mountain, its spirit level purpose is to give us the stability of a mountain, of a great mountain. So we can use the needle not just to, quote unquote, take away the pain, but to use the needle as a celestial lancet to support a person in really knowing themselves and their purpose. So that's kind of gives you a little bit of a difference. And again, when we talk about the Taoist underpinnings, we're really going to see it here, not in TCM as it's currently practiced. So just a quick bow to my ancestors, or you might also call this a bibliography or a list of sources. But just going along with this, I think of it, these books that I brought with me aren't just texts to me. They really are. Oops, I'll leave mine out. That one goes over there. But these books here have really, they're like the footsteps, the path that the ancestors have left for us to follow. And it's one of the most amazing parts of Chinese medicine is that we have a 3,000-year-old written textual history. That the primary book that we study in classical Chinese medicine is the Neijing Suwen, second book there, which was said, you know, it's certainly parts of it were written 3,000 years ago. Some of the text is that old. Not all of it, but a good deal of it. So that's giving us a lot of access to roots. And I've spent a lot of time with all these books. This is my Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching book. I love this book so much that it's like my friend. And there he is, Lao Tzu, the old boy master. So this is basically what we're touching on today. The I Ching is a background book, the Neijing, the Tao Te Ching. Alan Watts, for those of you who want to go deeper with this book, Tao, it's an incredible book. Alan Watts wrote this book just before he died. He didn't even finish it. So again, you're kind of getting those last threads of a really devoted, great philosopher. And then the last book is the Ecopsychology book, which these people are not ancestors, but a really wonderful book that has had a huge influence on my work. The preface to this book is by James Hillman, who is one of my great mentors, a Jungian. And so that's where most of our information is coming from, that in my own clinical practice. As I said, I'm going to try to limit the concepts to 3 characters that we're mainly talking about. And we know we've already talked about Tao. We've talked about Li. You already know these characters, right? Tao and Li. And then when I said Xuan, Xuan is the place where the chaos of Tao begins. It's like the place between Tao and Li. Xuan, it's dark mystery. So those are the only 3 we're going to be working with. And let's go back to Tao. Everybody know this character? Everyone's seen it at some time? Okay, so this is the Chinese character for that word or concept that I said. The simplest yet most complex. That invisible and visible organizing principle of the entire cosmos and also of me. So when I put the needle in, essentially it's how can I support this person in returning to their Tao. So what does that mean? It's often translated as way or path. It's the flowing course of nature. As we said, Li, the grains, the textures, the wave patterns are the way that Tao enters into organic life. Li is its principle of order in matter, and water is its metaphor. Now the character is again a composite, so you're getting used to this. For those of you who are new to Chinese characters, they're often made up of 2 separate radicals. So it's a fabulous character. The radical on the left is derived from another character that means foot. So there's the foot and also to walk. Okay, so and you can kind of see it. It looks like a foot. We have you said there was a pointer somewhere?
It's on the, behind the screen on the chalkboard.
Ah, I don't know if I can get that. Ah, I see it. It's fun to have one of these. Now I'm ready to go. So, this part of the character, it means foot or to walk. And then this wonderful radical means head. And you can see that some texts say that that's just the hair on the top of the head. But most texts say this is a head with a military plumed hat. And it refers to the leader. So, in a sense, I don't want to get into the idea of Shen, but that this guiding light from heaven, from above, guides our path. I'm going to stay there now. Okay. So, and also, the plumes on the top of the head refer to, coming back to the shamanic foundations, this idea that when I wear feathers, I'm like a bird and I'm reaching up to the stars, so I'm gathering spirit from above, and I'm also walking on the earth. So Tao, this unknowable unity, represents the paradoxical coming together of highest and lowest, okay, into a unity, coming together of the invisible and the visible. So you remember Lao Tzu said, the named and the nameless, what can be seen and what can't be. And the highest part of my being that reaches up to heaven and my feet, which actually allow me to manifest that heavenly mandate, or Tao. And here's another symbol for Tao, which you all probably are familiar with, the Tai Chi symbol. And again, the Tai Chi symbol, you see again that coming together of opposites. So in this symbol, Yang, which is the fiery, active principle, the initiating energy of the cosmos, and Yin, which is the receptive and, in Lao Tzu's words, creative, that which can manifest. So in a sense, Tao is divided into these two in order for the 10,000 things to come into being. So how does all this relate to health, okay? Because, you know, people say, well, that's all, it's great if you like philosophy, which I do, and if you like spirituality, which I do, that's wonderful. But my partner, Benjamin, he's sort of my conscience on the right shoulder. He's always saying, yeah, that's great, Laura, you know, it's all good ideas, but like what happens when, you know, the pedal hits the metal and you're in the treatment room? You know, how does this relate to health? How does this relate to how we live our lives? So this is a quote from the Neijing Suwen, that 3,000-year-old medical text that I mentioned. And the Yellow Emperor, who's the mythical, from the legendary era, Yellow Emperor, he's said to live about 5,000 years ago, during the legendary era in China. Was he real? Was he not real? You kind of live in that not knowing, but there he is. And he's said to be the guy who not only developed writing, and the way he got writing was he pulled clouds out of the sky. And he pulled the clouds down and developed these scrolling letters. And that's how language came to be. And he developed Chinese medicine and agriculture also, and all of the internal arts, the inner arts of alchemy. So he was busy, but he had a teacher. And his teacher was Qi Po. Qi Po was the first physician, worked with him. So the Yellow Emperor asks Qi Po, he says, I've heard that in ancient times, people passed 100 springs in autumn without their activity declining. So this is what we're saying, people were almost immortal. He's saying, now, humans half that age become decrepit and ill. I like that word. Do they become decrepit? You know? Is it because the world has changed, or that people no longer follow the laws of nature? So that was the Yellow Emperor's question. And when he says that in ancient times people passed 100 springs, he means that people could live fully and be in their Tao. They didn't begin to decline. Rather, they just kept living and growing and being in spiritual transformation. So Qi Po answered him. Here's a picture of Qi Po riding his oxen. It's actually, I don't know if it is Qi Po, but I think Qi Po probably looked like that. So Qi Po comes in on his ox and says, well, listen here. This is the deal. He says, people of antiquity observed the way. That's why they could live so long, and they understood Tao. They understood this mystery of being. They patterned themselves upon the principles of yin and yang, and you can see behind Qi Po that great shamanic shield of yin and yang. And those are the trigrams of the I Ching, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. So they pattern themselves upon the principles of yin and yang in nature, how nature, the rhythms of ebbing and flowing, creating, destroying, and resurrecting. They lived in harmony with the stars, so in other words, they were guided, and he was referring to the arts of astrology, which were, in a certain sense, actually I could have put here, it's part of Chinese medicine, really recognizing a person's time of birth as important and how the stars are moving, but how heaven guides us, as well as the seasons, the divinity of the planet, honoring that in winter, perhaps we don't do so much, and then in spring, like now, everyone starts getting all activated and busy, and that's the right way to be at this time of year. So he's saying if you live in harmony with the stars and you understand Tao, you will be able to live a healthy life. And that health means coming back to that place of my true self, my true nature. Now, you know, if we just think about that, he wrote this. This is coming from, again, 3,000 years ago. He's saying, oh, in the olden times. So if you place that historically, we know that already people used to go to bed when the sun set. They woke up when the sun rose. They were moderate in their eating and drinking. This is what he goes on to say. And if you think about how much we've diverged now compared to then, from the natural course of the seasons, from dark and light, from eating what's local in our area, we can see where so much of the discomfort, the dis-ease that we work with is rooted in some very obvious ways that we're not living in accordance to the way of nature. So, you know, in a certain sense, there's no way that we can go back to that time. We're so far away from it now that it would be ridiculous. It doesn't work to try to go back, but yet there's always ways in our everyday life that we can take a moment and think, well, how could I get closer to nature? How could I bring myself a little closer to a place of healing? If health comes from living in harmony with Tao by following the wisdom and rhythms of the natural world, you might just take a moment now and just think, well, what's one thing you could do this week? Because the Chinese, even though the ancient Chinese and the modern Chinese are very different, there's one thing that stays the same. They're very practical. They say ideas are one thing, but it's what we do that actually makes the change. So if you just think about one thing you could do this week that might bring you closer to this season. For example, eating dandelions. Right? Eating dandelions is in the Tao in late April in Maine. Right? And it's in the Tao to get out and play Frisbee at this time, not necessarily in the middle of January, you know. So keep that in mind. You just maybe give yourself that opportunity to think, well, this week I'm going to do one thing that will bring me closer to that way of being. So now, just to take this a little bit further, we're saying, well, to be in sync with nature, but what is nature for the Taoists? You know, here it is. We could look that, or we see it all around us. But what is this nature that they're talking about? They're not talking about nature as just, oh, you know, well, this is a quartz crystal. Comes from nature. Now, are they saying, well, you know, it's a crystal, and I don't know what the chemical composition is, but some of you probably do, and we can use it in certain kinds of mechanical devices. Nature is stuff. It's mindless stuff that we can make a profit on, or carve or cut up to our own needs. That isn't how the Taoists were looking at nature. They saw it, again, as the visible face of the sacred. It's also a macrocosmic reflection of my own being. So what's in me and what's out there are not different. And then there's this is the last of the Chinese words that we're going to use, and it's Xuan Pin. But Xuan you already know, because Xuan is that dark place inside where thoughts stop. Right? It's the mystery. It's the place where Tao shifts into Li. It's that interface. It's a dark, mysterious place. And underlying all of nature is this, the mysterious feminine, Xuan, Pin. When Lao Tzu at the beginning says, as named, it is the mother of all being. He's talking about this. The mysterious feminine, the visible face, how Tao becomes embodied. So it's the fertile chaos that gives birth to all those grains and textures, the multidimensional organizing principle, and it is the manifest unfolding of this cosmic ordering principle. So when people look at nature and say, isn't it incredible that every snowflake is a hexagon? I mean, isn't it incredible that there's all this form of 5 in so many flowers? Isn't it incredible that wave patterns follow a certain kind of mathematical formula? It's incredible, but that's what we're seeing. Because the incredibleness is that it's a manifest unfolding of a cosmic ordering principle that is beyond our capacity to fully understand. So Xuan Pin, the mysterious feminine, that is really what we're seeing in nature, and it's also what we're seeing in our own embodied life. As organic beings, we are an expression of that cosmic ordering principle. We are coming out of this matrix, which is a mystery. And just a quick look at the character on the left, it's a picture of a piece of thread dipped into black dye. So it's this dark, mysterious, subtle, almost invisible, and yet it's a thread that we can pull on. So we're looking also, they're talking about our genetic matrix makeup. Although they didn't know about chromosomes, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about our chromosomal inheritance that's actually underlying the expression of self. This is the source of being. And on the right is a character that refers to the female, the womb, right? This dark, hollow space from which being emerges. It also refers to a dark horse, a female, dark mare, which again reminds us of the idea of the ocean, the darkness from which all beings arise. So it is creative power itself. So with that in mind, just coming back to a moment to that this is what we hold in our own hands. And in our hands, in the mystery of my own being, is the answer to this question, who am I and what is my Tao? Right within me is this possibility. So that healing is just getting out of the way so that Li can arise from the Xuan of my own being and trusting that that being is already implicit. When we work with Chinese medicine from this perspective, what I'm actually looking for is what's getting in the way of the acorn becoming the oak. What block, what impasse is a fundamental principle of all of traditional Chinese medicine, all these different modalities, is that where there is a block, an impasse, or no free flow, so again thinking of water, then pain arises. And all we have to do with this needle is open that block, find a way for the qi to move again through the meridians, and Tao itself, the life force, which is innate in our being, will know just where to go. So I don't need a cookbook if I'm working this way. I don't need someone to tell me. I just simply need to see where that movement, where the block is, and if we can open that up, then healing will begin. So just to review, health from a Taoist perspective. Living in harmony with Tao, by observing and following the laws of nature. That's what Qi tells us, right? If we do that, we're going to be riding our oxen in for the next 100 years, no problem, with a big medallion, right, shining behind us. Dynamic balance of yin and yang, okay? So it's not a fixed state. Health is a dynamic, ever-changing rhythm, a dynamic balance of yin and yang, just as you see in the natural world. For those, you're all ecologists. It's an alignment with the divine, being guided by not just our personal will, but the stars above and the earth below our feet. This unfolding of Li, the grain of my life, from Xuen, the dark mystery, the growth of my own innate being, and the integrity of my life with the natural world around me, and from there to Tao. So here, as a last piece, I wanted to touch on, and I said this when I talked about, gave a summary of the talk, I mentioned ecopsychology, which, how many people in here have heard of ecopsychology? Yeah, some people, but not everyone, eh? You know, this book, Ecopsychology, came out in the 90s, and it's such a brilliant book. This work by Theodore Roszak, Mary Gomes, Alan Kanner, James Hillman, there's some other books on ecopsychology out there. It's such brilliant material. But unfortunately, it hasn't really, you know, I think they've had a hard time really finding a way for it to take off. But I use it a lot in my teaching, and I really recommend it, you know, for you guys to take a look at it. But what these psychologists were saying is that we've come as far as we can with the idea of working on the individual as an isolated historical event. Okay, so psychotherapy, where I'm just looking at my story, you know, the imperfections of my history, how I'm not living the life I want to live, it's like we've come to the end of what can be done with that. And they're saying we need to expand the idea of the self, so that the self is no longer an isolated ego boundary by the edges of my own skin. But the self extends itself into empathic resonance, into relationship with all of nature and the cosmos beyond. Ecopsychology suggests a synergistic relationship between personal and planetary well-being, that we cannot be well as individuals if our planet is ill. That the ways and needs of one are relevant to the other. And lastly, this list, but there's much more, it places the human psyche back in the web of nature. Again, in the creative mystery, and you all know eco, the root of eco, oikos, back on our home in planet Earth. Okay, and if you think back to the radical in the word Li, right, the Taoists were saying the same thing, that the texture, the grain of the earth that is our home is the place where the self emerges from, that our soul emerges from this organic web. And we cannot be well if we are separate from that. So what we come to is that, in fact, traditional Chinese medicine, and if you look deeply at most ancient traditional healing systems, they were ecopsychologies. All these traditions, the Taoists, traditional Chinese medicine, and again there I'm using TCM, but it's an abbreviation for this alchemical kind of medicine, and ecopsychology recognize health as an integrity of nature and self, and the empathic connections between humans and the natural world. So again, the interconnectedness between the personal and planetary, that health is a dynamic rather than a static state. It's a constant unfolding of my being in the world. If I try and hold it, or if I say that getting better means getting back to the way I was, we're not really healing. A view of the self that is not limited by the boundary of the skin, and I would add that is not limited to what can be seen with the ordinary eyes, that there's much more to embodied life than just what is visible. And last of all these traditions and all ancient healing traditions recognize that health is a state of being that honors the divinity of matter, that honors our bodies, not just as a machine that can be fixed, that breaks and is repaired, but rather as the expression of something that is beyond our knowing, the expression of something sacred and divine. That being in embodied life is a privilege that we are endowed with. So, coming back again to our hands, I'm going to invite you one last time. This time, try rubbing your hands together. This is an exercise that a lot of people have probably already done, and if you do Qigong or you've done this, but somehow or other I never get tired of this. So before we looked at our hands and we looked at the grain and we looked at the texture, but now we're actually beginning to look at what's beyond the form itself. So beyond the form itself, beyond the visible, is something that cannot be seen but can be known. So now begin to feel what you just generated between your palms. The warmth, a little sensation, and gradually, slowly begin to pull your palms apart and say, where do I begin and end? Where do I really begin and end? Do I begin and end with my skin, with my flesh, with my bones? Or moving your hands gently apart. See if you can begin to feel those webs of connection between your two palms. How far do you have to move your palms apart to break that web? And then when you get it, when you actually feel it, it's really fun to play with. And what you're touching here is actually the chi. This is what we work with the needles. This invisible yet palpable presence of life that doesn't end at our skin, but that actually extends all around us, out from our own being to every sentient being in the universe. So that we really are part of a web, and our healing is not just for ourselves alone. So when we ask that question, what is the visible face of Tao? The visible face of Tao is my being, is your being. It's the planet we live on. So thank you so much. We have lots of time for questions, and we'll take it from here. Great, so questions, comments, thoughts, reflections.
How would you go about finding a good practitioner?
Yeah, great question.
Can you repeat the question?
How would you go about finding a really good practitioner, and a practitioner who practices on this deeper level? There are actually a few websites that I refer people to. And on my website, fivespirits.com, we do have contacts with practitioners who've studied with me, who have been in the program that Benjamin Fox, my partner, and I run a training program for practitioners who do want to really go to this depth, this level of work. So there are some people on our site. Unfortunately, it's still limited, but it's growing. If you want other listings, should they email to us? And we can send you links? What?
Yeah, yeah, send an email to info@fivespirits.com.
info@fivespirits.com, and there are a few links to very reliable sources for practitioners that are trained to do this kind of deeper work. The school in America, there are a few schools which are really focused on this, although they are in the minority at this point.
And where are you located?
Well, we have a home in East Blue Hill, and we're actually in the process of creating a healing and learning center in East Blue Hill, Maine, called A New Possibility. Yeah, so if you get on our mailing list, we'll definitely keep you posted as that grows. I also teach in New York City, and I practice in New York, and I teach all over at this point. But we're based here. Yeah, we're based right here in East Blue Hill, Maine. Yeah, you're most welcome. Yeah.
Oh, Lorie, thanks. That was really a lot of fun. When you showed the slide with the acorn and the oak tree, I was reminded of James Hillman and the Daimon.
Right. Yes, I love that. Let me go back to it.
And my question really is, how do you put together, or do you try to put together the Jungian archetypal with the Chinese Tao and Qi? Are they complementary? Or
Rich. They are so complementary. And the only reason I didn't allow myself to start on that is we would have been here all night.
Okay.
So I used tapas, the yogic word for restraint, and didn't even open the conversation at the archetypal level.
Okay.
But the point is Li, right?
Yeah.
Li, that grain, that's where the archetypes live. They're inborn in our nervous systems. And the reason that I did study Gestalt, and I'm trained as a Gestalt therapist, I do a kind of inner sensory, body-oriented awareness technique called focusing.
Yeah.
And I've studied other psychologies, but where I finally landed in Jungian work because, well, first of all, a lot of Carl Jung's work is influenced by Taoism. He immersed himself in one of the essays that has been the biggest influence on my work is his commentary on a Taoist alchemical text called The Secret of the Golden Flower, where he talks about some of these things. He touches on some of this. And again, I'm going to zip it, because if I start, you'll never get to dinner. But yes, they're there. It's beautiful because you can bring these Taoist ideas and the understandings of these ancient practitioners right into archetypal psychology. They're very, very interrelated. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
How does all of this relate to chakras?
Okay. Chakras? Geez, you guys. 5 spirits.
Sorry.
You're asking me, you know, these are like those leading questions. Do you plant people in the audience? You know. That's great. This book, 5 Spirits, that I wrote, is really, it's about another Taoist system called Wu Shen. Wu Shen are the 5 spirits. And in a sense, Wu Shen is the technology. It gives us a spiritual technology for manifesting Tao. So everything we're talking about, how do we bring the nameless to the named? How do we bring the invisible into the visible? We bring it down through this kind of vertical axis, right? Which is the same as the chakras. The Sushumna of the yogic tradition, the chakra system. The Taoists also had a system, which was what they saw, a map, a spiritual map of the nervous system. Okay? And the 5 spirits are in many ways related to the chakras. The chakras live in the same interface space between visible and invisible as the meridians. But it's Wu Shen, the 5 spirits, that really are the Chinese correlate to that yogic system. Again, can't do it in an hour. But yeah, but it's all in here. If you're interested, get it on Amazon or get it out of the COA library. I think it's in there. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any elemental importance of using metal or acupuncture, and if metal's always been used.
Great question. Really nice question. They're originally from archaeological digs. There's strong evidence to show that the first needles, they called pien. They were little shards of stone. And they found these stone shards in digs. These digs go back, they say the pien, the stone needles, go back to Neolithic times. So that's why I say there's a shamanic underpinning to the medicine. It goes way before the written texts. They were using these needles. And there's also a mountain where they discovered many sharpened quartz crystals, which they think were used. So I believe that that's the case, that originally they were using bits of sharpened stone, and they must have been using them in many different ways, maybe to lance boils. Again, it's a physical medicine, and they probably were using them for spiritual, ritual purposes as well. But once the Chinese developed the capacity to work with metal, they shifted to metal. And it's been metal ever since. But early on, they were using different metals. So they would use gold to actually tonify the yang, because gold is a warmer, this yellow yang metal, and then they might use silver to tonify the yin. There was much more of an alchemical use of the metals, and that was relevant medically. At this point, you know, we use stainless steel. I wish I could use gold, but it isn't really feasible when you throw the needles out. But I just think at this point, it's the most, let's see, practical, and it's also very, as a tool, you can work with it. But you know, I know practitioners who are now going back to using stone, but they're just not penetrating the skin. And again, as I said, anything that moves the chi can be used as a needle. So metal is definitely not the only thing that we use.
If you have someone come to you and they say, well, I have a sore back and my life seems out of kilter, and you can say, well, you know, you should think about how Tao relates to you, and maybe think of this change and that change, and we'll do a little acupuncture. Where do you start getting real resistance to people following this path? At what point do they say, I can't do that, that's, my friends will think I'm strange, or I'm too, you know, our habits are embedded in sort of a cultural context, and to really sort of go along the way is challenging. And so I'm curious as to, in your practice, where do people begin to say, oh, I don't know if I can actually do that. I can meditate once or twice a week, but I can't do X, Y, or Z.
Well, I mean, my patients, what about me? You know, I mean, like I said, we're so far away from what the Yellow Emperor was talking about there, or what Shipo was talking about, that, you know, that we really can't go back. So I think it's a question of how do we move forward to return to an authentic way of being that may not be what they're talking about in the Neijing, but that could be authentic for us now. And that's a big piece of the work that we look at with practitioners. It's like, what's human nature really up to now? You know, we go back to gather up this wisdom, but healing doesn't mean a going backwards. Practically in the treatment room, honestly, I love resistance. I think it's a great principle of alchemy that you always treasure the lead. And the lead is the place where I resist it. No, I'm not gonna go to bed at 11 o'clock. You know, no, I'm not gonna go to bed before liver time, which is when you get all activated. You know, I'm a night owl, I love to stay up all night, you know? So it's like, we look at the place where that resistance is, and that's where, in alchemy, they say that's where the gold is. So you don't force the resistance, you don't blast it, you sit with it. And you get interested in it. And then you say, well, like water, if I'm not going to go that way, again, remember, water's the metaphor for Tao. So if I'm hitting a wall this way, maybe that's not the right way. And maybe we're going to go this way instead. So it's really a process that I engage with the patient that I'm working with. And yeah, so it's not like I'm going to have the answers. We're in collaboration to discover how Tao's going to look in this life, in this moment.
There's also ways to use the needles or herbs to support that movement, you know, like they might be stuck around certain
Right,
elemental.
definitely. Yeah, or even with you, with the massage and the tween eye, you know, change happens. Sometimes a person is resistant and you let that resistance be there and then you just keep working and then one day they go, hey, you know, I don't even want to eat all that sugar anymore. I mean, it's like, what was I doing eating all that sugar? Like, there's other flavors in the world.
Yeah, three-part question. What kind of a thing is a meridian? How can it get blocked? And how can a metal needle unblock it?
That is an amazing question. Okay, so a three-part answer. So a meridian, as we said, is this way, it's the li, it's the grain of the life force as it flows through organic being, my body. It's not, you know, I could dissect you or me, and it's not like we'd be able to pull out this thread and say, oh, you know, here's the bladder meridian. But we do know that there's a ways, if you observe the body, that the body forms from the embryo in uterus. It forms in particular ways in directions. So there's an underlying organic, energetic matrix for form that every single human being, you know, where we rely on that matrix for our form. That's the meridian. It's, again, it's coming to that place of Schwen. What arises as a chromosomal or genetic, what's the word I'm looking for, pattern that my body forms around. And that's, you know, and then ultimately those are the meridians. So another way, people say, well, the meridians are energetic. They're like streams of energy in my being. Okay, is that getting to get at it? I mean, some people say, well, there's more electromagnetic resonance on the meridians, but I'm not big on that, because I think then we're trying to take a Western kind of worldview and lay it on top of a very different worldview. For the Taoists, there's no problem. For the Chinese, there's no problem with that. There's a part of our physiology that can't be seen, that's purely energetic. So that's the meridian. How do they get blocked? So they get blocked in many, many different ways. Blocks can be as simple as a structural holding pattern. You know, if a meridian, say, for example, the gallbladder meridian runs through the side of the body and into the hips, you know how tight a lot of people you get in your hips, or your, maybe you just haven't, you know, you may have an injury in the low back and you begin to chronically spasm muscle. That will actually interfere with the flow of the qi. Another way meridians can begin to come out of balance is through long-term stress or short-term shock. You know, these are all ways that you could say the psyche or the subtle body begins to come out of balance and free flow. What else do I say? Oh, and then there's karmic patterns. So in other words, you may come into this world, whether you believe in lives before, you just believe in, the Chinese were big on ancestral inheritance. So even if you don't believe in a former life per se, we're still coming into this lifetime carrying things. So we may have a predisposition that we're born with to block up on a particular meridian, and many people do have that. So if you do practice, and I believe you are a Qigong practitioner, right? you know, you come in and you may be blocked and you may notice, oh, there I am doing that pattern again. It's because it's a part of our makeup, and then you do the breathing, you can unblock it that way, or again. So how does the metal needle open that up? That's a great mystery. But what I have found is that if I'm not centered, and I'm not clear in my intention when I insert the needle, it doesn't open up. That's for me. Now some people, again, if you put in a bunch of electrostim into the body, sometimes the muscles start to relax and the chi will flow, or you get blood flow moving, chi will follow blood. I'm getting into some medical terminology here, but you all following this? It's getting a little okay, but for me, what I do is I see the meridian. I on a subtle body level, I see it, I see the block, and I'm very clear in my intention. And this is a place where when I say, where do I begin and end? To truly practice Chinese medicine alchemically, I need to be able to extend my intention beyond my own skin, and I extend it through the needle. And I place the needle in there as a celestial lancet in that moment, you know, just being clear where I want it to go. And then there's an interface meeting between immaterial and material reality, and something happens. Okay, that's my answer to your 3 questions.
There's a word, dachi, for dachi.
Yeah, good, dachi, right. That is the term for when the chi, like was it Sunday? Sunday, I actually treated a person who'd never been treated before. And it happens to be a person who's very Western medical practitioner, open, but just never had acupuncture before. And I put the needle in and I said, tell me, so I'm putting the needle in and you barely feel it when it goes in. It penetrates the skin. Some people don't even know it went in. They're tiny. But when it gets into that place where the chi flows, things start happening. So this is a person who'd never been treated before, doesn't believe in acupuncture, and she's like, oh my God, and the needle was in her foot, and she's like, I'm feeling something up here, and there's tingling, and there's movement through the side of my neck. That's what happens. How does that happen? I'm willing to let some of it be a mystery. Yeah. Okay, Des.
Could you say more about how Moxa and mineral tinctures and chi?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I didn't bring Moxa with me, but again, that kind of principle of alchemical healing is anything that moves the chi can be used as a tool. So Moxa, what I actually do with that is I use Japanese incense, right? And I'm just going to do a little, and the way it works is I take this dried herb and I place it on the point. So just like I might use a needle, I take, and it's called rice grain moxa, you take a tiny bit of this dried herb and you place it on the acupuncture point, and then you light it. So you actually light it right on the skin. And when I mention, when I look at my hands, I see scars from picking up burning moxa. I was trained so you let that moxa burn down until the person feels a little heat on the point. So in this case, we're using heat rather than the needle to stimulate the chi movement. Heat is an energizing factor, and once the person feels the heat, I pick it off, and I may do 5 to 10 of those. And that's how Moxa will work. A mineral tincture is more like a medicinal. They use minerals in some of the Chinese preparations, the medicinals. And so some of the minerals they use are actually in the herbal formulas. But then they also use the crystals. You can use crystals in a homeopathic way and put them in water and then put them in the sunlight, and you can actually absorb properties from the crystals. But that's getting pretty far out on the edges. It's way out towards the energetic side of the medicine.
So why Artemisia and not dandelion?
Well, Artemisia vulgaris is what's used, and the reason they use it is that, probably for one thing, that's the tradition, and it's what's been used for thousands of years. But the other thing is, when it's dried, it holds heat really well, and it burns very, very evenly. Then the smoke itself has a medicinal property, and the herb on the skin is said to have a slightly medicinal property. But I think, again, practically speaking, it's a beautiful herb for burning. It burns slowly, evenly, it's very reliable. And I've tried using other herbs at times, and they just don't work as well. Yeah.
I wanted to see if you could talk more about the Bach remedy. You happen to have Bach, and where, if that,
Flower
where it falls in
essences,
traditional
yeah.
Chinese.
You know, maybe, let me hold that question, because we're coming to dinner.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of longer question,
Yeah.
but, so let's let people who need to leave at 5:30 can leave, and we can
Sure.
pick up. And your question?
I'm curious about your biography sort of as a healer, and you mentioned this sort of this process of intention and using that intention with your patients, and I'm wondering if that's a process that you've nurtured over the years and it's something that's grown, or whether it's just something that's always sort of been there.
No, it's good. Yeah, it's definitely gathering the capacity to work with intention, which again is an alchemical, it's a piece of inner alchemy. Can I give you one more Chinese word? as a parting, our last hurrah is called Neidan, and Neidan means inner alchemy. And inner alchemy is this, well, if you do meditation practice, yoga is a kind of inner alchemy. It's working with our own energies and learning to use them. So intention is the capacity to use this part of my psyche, which one of the 5 spirits, it's called the Yi, and in alchemical texts they talk about it, the capacity to extend that into the needle and then into the meridian. That takes a lot of time. I mean, for some people who really maybe truly are born gifted healers, it wouldn't, but it took me, I didn't begin practicing 20 years ago able to use that. It's a art that develops over time, and I do think what I've found, and I've seen this with all the students I've worked with over many, many years, and the students who work with us in the training program, is that you can't push it, and if you try to force it, it won't work. But what the Taoists say about alchemy is you just keep showing up. The Chinese word alchemy actually has within it the idea of practice. So you just keep doing it, and then something magical happens. So, okay, one more. I think we will need to stop. At least one more question, then we'll let people who need to go, and then we can talk about Bach flowers and flower essences. And if you want to come up, you can look at this. And yeah, so you're
Just a quick,
yeah.
do you work with medical people, do you work with doctors if somebody has concerns?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole legal and professional background that anyone who's working in healthcare or part of the healthcare system. So even in the consent forms that my patients sign, that's in there. I'm certainly not replacing a medical doctor. Some doctors, I cross-refer with physicians, or if I have questions about something that's going on, I refer to physicians, and physicians refer to me. And hopefully, that's the direction that healthcare is going in this country. But I'm not working in a vacuum by any means. Although in my practice, I have a private practice, and I don't have a doctor supervising me.
And is your book available in this area?
Yeah, you can get my book anywhere. You could ask them to order it for you at Sherman's. You can get it online at Amazon. You can get it through my publisher. The website is Chiron Books publishes it. Lantern Books, and as I said, it's easy to get. Just go right on, Amazon has it. Yeah, 5 Spirits, that's the name, and it's easy to get. Great, so all you guys who need to take off, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.